I'm starting with a question. And the question is, are you a leader? Do you consider yourself to be a leader? And one of the things I've encountered so much is people think of leadership as a position. Well, if I'm not the president, I'm not the leader. If I'm not the CEO, I'm not the leader. The reality is that leadership is a skill, and that it is a life skill, essential, because it is our job to influence. And that's what leaders do, is they influence. And so if you're a parent, you're a leader. If you're a teacher, if you're a speaker, you are a leader because it is your job to influence. And as professional speakers, we are influencing for money. We are not doing this for free. We actually are engaging where we are going to be paid. And you know why we're being paid? Because of the value that we bring. And so for us as leaders, as people who are engaging with the world, bringing a message to the world, we are about the value that we are presenting to those people. It was so wonderful to listen to Billy Selekane talk about this last night when he was talking about return on investment. People want value. They don't want to just have an expense of a speaker. They want value. They want to know, is the speaker going to bring value? Is the speaker going to change lives? Is the speaker going to have an impact? And so I'm going to take you through three things. I'm going to take you through the first one, which is about leadership capacity, and it's really called Rhino thriving. How do we thrive and the Rhino energy? The second area I'm going to take you through is the Rhino genius. What is the genius of the Rhino? In fact, what is the genius of you? And the last one I'm going to take you through is the Rhino grit. What is that about? And what does that mean for us as leaders? So let's start with this idea of the Rhino thriving. And I want to introduce you to a concept of the current leadership state. So as was said earlier on, I've worked with leaders all over the world. And one of the things I've discovered is how few leaders are actually thriving. And this has been startling to me. I mean, I've literally worked with leaders, well, so-called leaders, even in fact, who are managers of managers of managers. They have a sort of 800 odd people reporting to them. And their behavior is not a thriving behavior at all. In fact, the other two I'm going to introduce you to are what are more prominent. So let's talk a little bit about this. What are the three current leadership states that I see? And again, this is kind of a continuum, but instead of a continuum between two, it's a continuum between 3 points. And I'm going to take you through that in a bit of detail. So let's start with the first kind of leader. This is the person who's just trying to get through each day. Every day, they're just trying to survive. Do you relate to that at all? Maybe I certainly do. I have been in a survivor state as a leader. I've been in a survivor state as a speaker, where I'm just trying to make it through the day. And this kind of leader often is sitting with a bit of a victim mindset, maybe going, oh, maybe if the economy was better, or, maybe this, maybe that. But it's this struggle to just survive, to just get through the day, and not really thinking long-term, not really thinking about, what their legacy could be, what their longer-term impact might be. And I think for all of us as speakers, the word legacy, we would love to make a difference. It's not about, I want a statue erected to me. It's about, I want to have left this world having made a difference. And I think that's really what a survivor often can't keep in mind. And so in this survivor state, you'll notice the symbolism we've got here is the egg. We aren't hatched. We are kind of constrained. In fact, when we start to crack open, we close it up with a Band-Aid. We are staying inside, and we are not really bringing ourselves fully to the world. Now, by the way, if you currently find yourself in this state, that's okay. It's better than the alternative of not surviving. So it's okay to be a survivor. It might not be something a place where you want to stay. And I'll be very honest with you and say that most leaders that I work with, and I'm going to talk about our assessment a little bit later on, are in the survivor state by far. In fact, I've worked with organizations where 75% of their leaders are in a survivor state. And it's really quite scary. So let's park this one in a corner over here and say we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Let's now look at a second one. And this is the leader whose motto is try harder. Let me just try harder. Let me work harder. Let me pedal faster. Let me do whatever I can to just overcome things through effort. And so I'm going to work longer hours. I'm going to push my people harder. I'm going to be so results focused that I might even work to the damage of myself or others. And we've got a name for this one as well. We call this one the striver. And again, notice the symbolism of the egg here, running like crazy, but not hatching to full potential. And so again, maybe you find yourself in that striver state. And I'm sure you've seen some of the research where, the research is when you move from a 40-hour week to a 50-hour week or a 60-hour week, those extra hours are much lower productivity than the first 40. And so it's not wisdom to be in a striver state. It's not sustainable to be in a striver state. By the way, I do believe in hard work. I don't believe in just sitting back and expecting things to happen. But it's not ideal to have a try harder approach to everything at the expense of try smarter, try softer. What's going to give us the sustainability? And it might be useful to be aware of that. So let's park that one as well. And let's have a look at another possible leadership state. And this one is the one where we have built an inner capacity. We've been on an inner journey, and we're on an ongoing inner journey where we are working towards creating capacity in ourselves so that our people can thrive, that our audiences can thrive. Because all great leadership is built on great self-leadership. So what we're really looking for is we're looking for leaders, and if we want to leave our mark on the world, we want to be the kind of leader that has built this inner capacity, that has been on the inner journey, that is invested in their inner growth. Because all great leadership that lasts, leadership that is sustainable, is built on the inner journey, and it's always lead self before others. Now, I love the symbolism of the heart for this, because as we think about a heart, we think about, yes, it's the place of courage, it's the place of power, it's the place of love. And sometimes that love has to be the kind of, more difficult variety. But what we're really talking about here is investing in ourselves, because I believe that great leadership is love. Not niceness, by the way. I don't believe great leadership is nice at all, or even a popularity contest. Great leadership is love, in that we're prepared to have the difficult conversations. We're prepared to speak the truth in love. But how do we give love to the world if we haven't nurtured it in ourselves first? How on earth are we going to get onto a stage and influence people through the power of speaking the truth in love if we've never nurtured it in ourselves? That is the inner journey. That is the vital journey. And so the name we give this one is the thriver leadership state. And so again, if we have a look at these, and we have a look at these and put them into a bit of a triangle like this, what we can then do is we can say, well, I kind of wonder where I would plot. Am I in this sort of area that is more thriver, or in the area that is more survivor, or in the area that is more striver? And what is the impact I want to have? So, what is your current leadership state? And it can vary, by the way. I mean, I've probably had weeks where I've been in all three states in 1 week. So, there's no judgment on where you are, but it's very important if we want to, as speakers, change the shape of the world while we're here. We probably are going to do a much better job if we're spending more and more time in the thriver state rather than the survivor or striver state. By the way, I'm going to unpack a little bit more detail what the thriver state is all about. And this little dot I've got represented here is where I actually typically find most leaders. And this is a typical sort of space, somewhere between survivor and striver, but way below thriver. So they are trying to be people-focused as survivors. They're trying to be results-focused as strivers, but actually they haven't built the capacity to be able to do either of those consistently. And that is why, ultimately, if you plot it here right now, what would change in your business, in your speaking business, or for you in your impact from the stage, what would change if we could move that up to here? What would change if we could get that dot right up into very high in the thriver space? Now, by the way, to aim for that top corner, obviously aiming for the top corner is beautiful, but the wonderful thing about thrivers is not that they're always at the top of the triangle. The wonderful thing about thrivers is that when they find they're not there, they are aware, they know, they can see it, and they are skilled, they know how to get back there. And that's really what we're looking for as speakers, as leaders, is not only being in the thriver state, but when we find ourselves edging, maybe triggered, or whatever it might be, that we are aware, we pick it up, and we know how to move ourselves back. And so you might be wondering, well, how on earth do I find out where I am on this? So where am I on this plot? And we have an assessment. And the assessment is called the Egg 3 Leadership Assessment. And you are welcome to do this. And if I'm not mistaken, Marie's probably going to pop the link into the chat as well for those of you who don't have your phones handy to grab a QR code. There we go, the egg3assessment.com. Thank you, Marie. And so you're welcome to do this. It is a free assessment to find out which state you're in. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what else we provide if you do that. And again, this is a gift to you as leaders, as speakers. So I want to move on to something else now. And that next space is the Rhino genius. And you know, the genius of the Rhino is that the Rhino doesn't try to be an elephant or a giraffe. It's itself. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. This thriving leadership capacity is built on knowing and accepting who we really are. And so I'm going to take you through just a couple of very simple concepts here. And this piece I could probably unpack over a day if necessary, but I'm going to just start with this. There is a door, there is a gateway that I believe connects us with our genius and deals with the things that are holding us back. You know, we all have those limiting beliefs, those saboteurs, whichever language you want to use, those parts that actually can get in the way. And so for me, this has been a significant piece of work in my own life, especially over the last sort of 18 months to 2 years of dealing with what I would maybe call my shadow side. And, you know, the shadow side are the bits of ourselves that we've parked to one side because we've been so shaped and influenced by the shoulds and the musts and the oughts of the world that we live in. And we really want to go and embrace that shadow side, bring it into the light, bring it to where we can see it. And I'm going to talk about two kind of parts that we probably are ignoring that are in the shadow. And the one type are maybe called saboteurs. They are also called managers or firefighters or protectors. They are parts that have developed of ourselves that actually are very typically quite childish. They're typically sort of established in our childhood years. I've got one which I call the compliance manager. And the compliance manager, when I actually started speaking to the compliance manager, turned out to be 5 years old. And yet I was submitting to that voice regularly in my life. Okay. And so for me, this journey has been a journey of figuring out what are these parts that are holding me back. But there's another kind of a part, the kind that I call the genius part. And they are sometimes called the exiles. These are parts of our core being, our uniqueness, our genius that we have exiled because we felt under pressure, maybe as children, that this is not acceptable to the world. Maybe you were criticized for when you brought that exuberance or that genius, or maybe that neurodiversity, as Jenna Evelyn was just talking about, that we've tried to suppress it, we've tried to hide it, we feel like we're not acceptable. And so part of this journey, this gateway, this door that we're going through is not only to bring these saboteurs into the light and to practice self-leadership to get beyond them, but it's also to bring the genius that we've suppressed into the light and bring that to the world. And that's why I love using this word genius, because every one of us has a genius. Every one of you has an area of genius in their lives. Every one of you has something to offer the world that nobody else can. And while it's hiding away, while it's been relegated into the shadow, we are not going to be able to bring that to the world. And so it's quite a journey. I'm not expecting this to be simple, but now you can see thriving leadership means I've looked in the mirror. And by the way, occasionally I come across a leader that I say, are you prepared to look in the mirror? And they say, no, that's too scary. They might be big and bold leaders and doing all sorts of things, but the reality is they're too scared to go on the inner journey. And how do we sustain great leadership if we don't go on that inner journey? How do we not also stumble like so many leaders do without going on that inner journey? We really do want to go on that inner journey so that we can get there. So I'm going to just introduce you to something, and I loved what Billy Selekane was saying last night about the idea of micro learning. You know, he said, rather than develop the $1,000 course, why not develop, you know, a series of short videos that that you can actually, you know, watch, that we only charge like $10 for? Well, on YouTube, we've just launched a series of 45 videos. And they're busy rolling out at the moment. I think we're up to video number 15, if I'm not mistaken. Is that March? No, 12. We've just done a video number 12, but they're coming out 3 a week at the moment. And so if you follow us at Totally Morpheus on YouTube, so at Totally Morpheus on YouTube, and I see Marie has actually put a link into the chat as well, or the full thing over here. So you can either go to the channel or straight to these videos. And so this is again for free. This is available to you, and we're also doing a slightly different version, which is for people who do the egg, where let's say they come up as survivor. There are 15 videos that they will get on how they can progress as survivors. So you know, these are just some offerings to you, some gifts to you to take you on that inner journey of becoming a thriver leader, that thriver leader that can make a difference in the world and that can influence from the stage in a sustainable way. So I'm going to leave that at that, and I'm going to move on to my last topic, which is Rhino grit. Rhino grit. And I've subtitled this Willpower versus True Power. I do know willpower is supposed to be one word, but it just worked better this way. So willpower versus true power. And I want to just deal with the willpower thing straight away. The research on willpower is, to me, absolutely fascinating, because so many of us think, you know, again, I must just try harder. It's the striver mentality, isn't it? You know, pedal faster, work longer hours, whatever it might be. Just try harder is the solution to everything. And what the research on willpower shows is that it is a very finite resource. It's an extremely finite resource. And in fact, what the research came up with, and it's multiple studies over multiple countries and businesses and industries and all sorts of stuff, and it keeps coming back with the same thing, is that the amount of willpower we have per day is an extremely limited resource. And so what they found is the people who scored the strongest in willpower, and they've got all sorts of assessments that they do for this. For example, you encase your hand in ice and you see how long you can last, you know, and this kind of thing. And the people who came out with the strongest willpower, they then researched of how frequently do they use that willpower. And basically what they do, and isn't this a sign of true grit? What they do is they try not to use willpower for anything. What they do is they know they have strong willpower, but they create processes, systems, rituals in their lives that they don't need willpower to get through. And I'm going to talk about 3 of those in a moment. But there are these 3 things and these are just 3 summary things. I think there are probably hundreds, but they don't rely on willpower. The people with the strongest willpower don't rely on it because they know it's a finite resource. And they will build whatever they need so that they very seldom need it, so that when they do need it, it's available. And when I say it's a finite resource, let me give you a simple example. You put 2 groups of people, one through a strenuous thing where it requires willpower. For example, they've got this incredible plate of cookies in front of them that they just want to dive into. And another group has maybe this plate of broccoli in front of them that they maybe don't want to dive into. But they leave them with this thing for a period of time. And the ones that had to resist, you know, taking that cookie or whatever it is, they then put them into a further test. And that group fails immediately, But the group who didn't really have to exercise willpower to get through the first exercise had tons left for the second. And so this willpower idea is a very finite resource. Don't rely on it. Let's look at what we can rely on. Well, the first thing is this, and I just love this, is clarity. You know, all the way back to the original 7 Habits was this idea of begin with the end in mind. Have absolute clarity on why you're here on this planet, what you want to achieve, how you want to achieve it. Clarity overcomes the need for willpower, because when it is so clear and so vivid in you, you don't have to rely on willpower. Your grit will come from your clarity. The second one I want to talk about is that genius thing. You know, I loved what what Steve Johnson said earlier on about, when the lion roars, the elephants listen. And there's this idea that, can you see how effortless this is, being a lion? This is not willpower. This is not, oh, I'm going to try and be a lion. This is, I'm just myself. I am so effortlessly me. I'm linked to my essence. I know who I am. Those pieces that were in the shadow, maybe lions don't understand that, but as human beings, we relegate things to the shadow. Our genius, the lion knows and relies on his genius. The lioness knows and relies on her genius, and how much that works together for success. And so this genius journey for me is absolutely critical. And then finally, journey. I've talked a little bit about this idea that we need to deal with our shadow. The thriver leader is on the inner journey, and grit grows from that inner journey. So the lion knows it has grit because it's wired for grit. It's embraced who it really is. The inner journey is critical. We need to go on that journey to discover the fullness of who we are and the fullness of what we can bring to the world. This is true grit. So true grit is not willpower. True grit is clarity. We know what we're here for. I know why I know what I'm here for. I know what I am. Sorry, I know I am a lion, or I am whatever I am, my personal uniqueness. And I'm on the journey. I'm journeying through it. I think we understand this. Grit is built as we faced obstacles and we pursue and we go through them. That is how we build that grit. So that takes us through these 3 areas we've talked about. We've talked about, in our Rhino Reach, we've talked about the leadership capacity, which is what state of leadership are we in, and what can we do to get to the thriver state. We've talked about the inner genius. Have we really connected with our gift that we can bring to the world? And we've talked about grit, the grit of knowing who we are, knowing why we are, and bringing that to the world through a journey that we're on, an inner journey that we're on. And so I want to leave you with two things to think about. So the first is, do you now realize that you're a leader, and what are you doing to nurture that inside of you so that you can leave your mark on the world, that you can fully understand and make that mark? And linked to that is, what are you doing to become a thriver? Is it just a matter of escaping the egg? Or are you going to make such an investment in yourself that you actually grow into the dragon?